This video will contain minor visual spoilers for Star Wars Jedi Survivor in situations where I think it's necessary to showcase the state of the game or to demonstrate a point. There are no story spoilers here beyond what EA has revealed in pre-release promotional materials and trailers. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is a difficult game for me to talk about, for a variety of reasons. It's very easy to look at this game and understand why it's being called the best Star Wars game since KOTOR. The incredible level design that responds and changes as the player progresses, beautiful art direction, and a Star Wars story evocative of European cinema all push in this direction. The truth, in my opinion, is somewhat more complicated, because for every beautiful moment that's meant to inspire awe, or cutscene with emotional impact meant to play on your heartstrings, or a triumphant victory in combat meant to bring elation and relief, there's a corresponding technical issue or baffling design decision that consistently distract your attention from what it was supposed to be focused on. Perhaps not since Cyberpunk 2077 have I played a game that more thoroughly self-sabotages its most significant moments. That comparison sounds hyperbolic, but is extremely targeted and very specific. Jedi Survivor is not on the same level of broken as Cyberpunk 2077 was at launch. Not even close. But the extent to which its problems, in either technical performance or design, consistently distract me from enjoying the game and the work the dev team obviously put into making this an otherwise very good experience, are comparable to Cyberpunk in a way not many games are. As with Cyberpunk, I'm incredibly jealous of people who will play Jedi Survivor for the first time in 2024 or 2025. As it may very well be the best game you play that year, assuming technical improvements continue to be made at the same rate that they have since launch. I'd like to talk about technical performance all at once, so that I can talk about the rest of the game without constantly circling back to it, so I'm going to do that first. There's a false narrative surrounding Jedi Survivor that it's mostly just the PC port that's bad, while console performance is mostly fine. In the first few days I played Jedi Survivor on PC, I thought that was probably true. I was prepared to come into this review and say that Jedi Survivor is the worst PC port of the past 10 years, even worse than Arkham Knight, which, despite all its performance problems, never crashed for me nearly as much as Jedi Survivor has. But after I switched to playing on PlayStation, where I completed a file 100% in a little over 30 hours of gameplay, I realized the truth. This game needed another 6 months in the tank on every platform. The PC version is unstable and poorly optimized for all hardware, and while optimizations are steadily being made with patches, it's only become more unstable since launch. At a certain point it became completely unplayable for me. After 5 minutes at the very most, but usually before the intro cutscene is even over when I start a new game, I'll encounter a crash with an error code for DXGI error device removed with reason DXGI error device hung. This was concerning for me because it's usually indicative of a hardware failure. But it only started days after launch, and other people who have had this issue have no hardware failures either, and encountered it at various times on various patches and in various hardware configurations. For reference, here's a partial list of games where my hardware works just fine. People have fixed this crash in a variety of ways, from rolling back drivers, to reinstalling Visual C++ redistributables, to, in my case, bizarrely, uninstalling a recent Windows security update, this one in particular. But none of these fixes work consistently for everyone, speaking to the problem being specific to the game rather than specific to hardware or operating system failure. At launch, frame times were so erratic on PC that I could barely engage with the combat functionally, as a lag spike would routinely eat my inputs and cause me to take hits and die, when I know for a fact that I blocked because I have an input viewer to verify it. Though luckily the frame times have mostly evened out for me, though granted I'm playing on a 4090, so I'd expect the game to perform well. And without another rig to review on, I really can't judge how it performs on older or lower end hardware. And although I heard at launch that it was similar to my experience, I have no idea how performance optimizations and post-launch patches might have helped other hardware. There's also a notable problem with screen tearing whenever the game's render frame rate exceeds the maximum refresh rate of the display being used, regardless of whether VSync is on or off. VSync should cap the frame rate to the maximum refresh rate of the panel. That's one of the things that VSync generally does. In games like Jedi Fallen Order, where VSync and the frame rate cap are independent settings, it can be the case that VSync only prevents screen tearing at frame rates below the refresh rate of the display. What Jedi Survivor seems to be doing is porting forward the VSync functionality from Fallen Order, but cutting out the frame rate cap, since Survivor has no frame rate cap setting. But they haven't applied a frame rate cap setting to the VSync setting. The result, if you're using a 60Hz panel, is an overall gameplay experience where you're either failing to hit 60 FPS because the game's poorly optimized, or you're hitting and exceeding 60 FPS and experiencing unavoidable screen tearing as a result. In my gameplay, I couldn't prevent screen tearing even using an external program like Rivatuner's statistics server to limit the frame rate of the game to 60 FPS. Giving credit where it's due though, the PC version, rampant stability issues aside, is an incredibly beautiful game when the screen isn't tearing. Distant object pop-in is noticeable but not really distracting, and the richness of detail in every object, character, and environment really shines through on the PC platform at high resolution when textures fully load, regardless of whether ray tracing is on or off. And when performance is optimized and the kinks are worked out, I think this will be an incredible visual experience, if nothing else. The same, unfortunately, cannot be said for the console versions, where the PC's inexcusable instability is traded for maybe one of the worst implementations of dynamic resolution scaling I've ever seen in a video game. This is most noticeable on objects that are in motion, like Cal, and enemies, constantly, and occasionally, horrifyingly, during cutscenes, which are supposed to run in quality mode automatically, meaning that this dynamic resolution scaling affects all modes the game can run in to some pretty horrifying effects in certain situations. For instance, in this cutscene, Marin's face disfigures into a blob of nightmare fuel mid-cutscene when the game is supposedly in quality mode. I'm zooming in here so that you can see it better on the video player and on mobile devices, but take my word for it that this was extremely distracting during full screen gameplay, and this is not the only time this happened. I'm an unapologetic frame rate snob, so most of my 30-hour completionist playthrough was spent playing on performance mode. And not only can I tell you that the consoles struggle to maintain 60 FPS consistently, they also downscale resolution to as low as reportedly 648p in an attempt to hit that frame rate target. The longer the game has been running, the worse this problem seems to get, and the same can be said for the game's constant struggle to load textures at full resolution, which might lend some credibility to the whispers of a VRAM leak, as it does get to a point where the game can't maintain 60 FPS despite extreme downscaling, and it progressively gets slower and slower at loading full resolution textures, so you're looking at an extremely pixelated and blurry image with ghosting artifacts and low detail textures that still fails to hit its target frame rate. It's truly not an exaggeration to say that in many situations and many areas, Jedi Survivor on PS5 looks significantly worse than Jedi Fallen Order on the same platform. And while there are certainly very good reasons for this to be the case, the areas are larger and more open, the increase in overall detail impacts performance significantly, causing the console to downscale, but it's still a detriment to the gameplay experience, regardless of the root cause, and that it launched in this state is unacceptable. During my gameplay on PS5, I noticed a significant screen tearing problem. Stop me if you've heard this before. I suspect that this has the same root cause as the screen tearing on PC, but obviously this is a guess on my part. As said, the level of LOD pop-in on PlayStation 5 at least is extreme, and it's commonplace to see low-resolution models or textures very up close, usually replaced a few moments later by their full-resolution versions. The asset streaming is also quite slow, making me think that this game hasn't been properly optimized for the next-generation console's NVMe drives. Gameplay areas will frequently not be finished loading in time for the player to enter them, resulting in a variety of scenarios. First, an extended wait at a door to an interior area, frequently encountered when entering Pyloon's Saloon on Kobo. Second, a frozen screen while the game finishes loading an area that you tried to enter. Third, areas failing to load fully, resulting in very low detail in models and textures and significant errors in lighting. Fourth, and most rarely, the ground failing to load in time for Cal to walk on it, resulting in him falling through the world. While I didn't spend too much time in quality mode during actual gameplay, the game switches to quality mode automatically during cutscenes, so I can say for sure that this mode isn't immune to frame drops during busy scenes, and is also not immune to weird ghosting effects either. Giving the PlayStation 5 version its due credit though, I encountered only one hard crash back to the console menu during my time with the game, and a few instances of freezing on load screens that required me to return to the PlayStation menu and close and relaunch the game. This, at the time of this review, makes the console version the best way to play the game in my opinion. It may look really terrible most of the time and be incapable of maintaining an acceptable frame rate, but at least it doesn't crash, which is more than I can say for the PC version, though as time goes on, I expect this statement to become less and less true. I did not play the Xbox version as I don't have access to that console at the moment, but based on the reports of others, the technical performance on Series X is on the same level or slightly worse than the PlayStation 5, so take that for what it's worth. Given the degree to which my technical experience with this game was extremely poor on top-end PC hardware, and on the supposedly better running of the two consoles, I feel the need to take a brief moment to address the narrative I've seen proliferating on Twitter and YouTube, more around the launch of Survivor than today, that these performance and technical issues are overstated, that it's just PC players being babies and expecting perfection, and that the game actually runs fine on PC and most consoles. People excusing the performance of this game on consoles are not believable. Their PlayStation 5 is not better than my PlayStation 5. Therefore, the statement, "I had no performance problems" cannot possibly be true if they played the same game I did. People saying they had no performance problems, if they're being honest, are actually telling you they failed to notice performance problems. There's nothing wrong with that, but those words don't mean the same thing. People have differing sensitivities to frame rate and visual fidelity, and there's nothing wrong with being able to look at this game's performance on PlayStation 5 and not notice anything wrong with it. If you enjoyed this technical experience, I'm very happy for you. But if you don't notice these problems, you have no business commenting on them, and you definitely have no business telling other people that they're incorrect, or worse, overreacting. And with that, I'm done bitching about performance. We can actually talk about the game now. Getting the easy stuff out of the way first, the music and sound design in Star Wars Jedi Survivor is excellent, and part of why it feels so authentically Star Wars. You can get a lot wrong in designing a Star Wars game, but as long as the sound design and music slaps, you're basically getting carried. This soundtrack would not sound out of place in any mainline Star Wars film, and there's one track in particular that plays during the credits and at other times throughout the game that really hits hard. The composers Stephen Barton and Gordy Hobb did excellent work here as usual. Playing Jedi Survivor for the first time can give the impression that the development team made a list of the most widespread criticisms of Fallen Order and addressed them one by one. Widespread, of course, is a different word from valid or legitimate, a difference which I think explains why they fixed a lot of popular complaints, but doubled down on certain design decisions that actively make the game worse. Overall, I think Survivor's a significant improvement over Fallen Order in a lot of ways, but the commitment to a few baffling design choices, and the few ways in which it's actually a downgrade, really hinder the game from achieving its full potential. Right away, Jedi Survivor stands out among sequels, particularly sequels within the broad Metroidvania genre, in that you start the game with every ability you had at the end of the last game, and your toolkit only grows from there, rather than doing the normal Metroidvania sequel thing of resetting your powers. This is a good decision, and was predicted, as you can't really narratively explain Cal forgetting to use the Force, but it did constrain the potential for adding further abilities to the toolkit, forcing the development team to get more imaginative. Luckily, having the ability to push, pull, wall run, and Jedi flip right from the beginning of the game allowed the team to create some interesting levels that are fun to traverse right from the beginning. And they only really improve from beginning to end. These levels respond to your growing skill and ability toolkit in a way that Fallen Order's levels never really did, forcing you after every new acquisition to use your new abilities together in sequence skillfully and creatively to traverse and solve puzzles. This is taken to the extreme in the several Force Terror platforming challenges, which showcase some of the best platforming and traversal sequences in the entire game. These tears present a good mastery challenge of the abilities that you acquire, and feel in a lot of cases like 3D Celeste sections. There are also combat challenges in these Force Tears, some of which are fairly good, but the worst of them are gank fights that usually feel like bullshit and fail to reward you adequately. A few in particular that took me about a half hour each would give a skill point as a reward. On the one hand, I can see this as a good thing, because it would suck to have an interesting upgrade locked behind a really painful fight. But on the other hand, a skill point just is not an adequate reward to the pain that players went through to get them in these instances. Beyond how the level design incorporates ability progression into its concepts, the intricacy of the levels as looping overworld sections has taken a corresponding step up from Fallen Order to Survivor. These areas have been designed with backtracking in mind to minimize the number of bonfires and adequately reward exploration with ease of access back to areas to return to later. In Fallen Order, only Bogano was truly built to have a new area explorable after every upgrade, while other planets frequently prevented you from leaving until you had acquired multiple abilities consecutively. Survivor drip feeds you abilities at a more consistent pace, and its two main planets generally have something new for you to discover when you return there after getting every new ability. Yes, I did unfortunately say two main planets. There are actually 6 total planets, but that number can be quite deceptive. One is a glorified boss arena. One more, which I won't spoil, is a small level visited in late game that's somewhat analogous to Fortress Inquisitorius from Fallen Order in its size and scope. Coruscant and the Shattered Moonbase are somewhat larger than this and similar to each other in size, and then there are the 2 larger planets, Kobo and this one, which was shown but not named prior to launch, so I won't name it here. Both of these planets have a large central area and multiple, mostly linear, looping sections that play like a more traditional Metroidvania level. I don't feel shy about saying that I don't feel like these open areas work very well, and I prefer the design seen in Fallen Order and really most of this game, where there are looping levels that can have large spaces within them and are interconnected between each other. You'll be spending the vast majority of your time in this game on Kobo, visiting the planet no fewer than 5 times in a normal casual playthrough, and it's clear that this planet has had more attention paid to it than any other by far, and it's not even close. This is a huge departure from the production cycle of Fallen Order, where Zepho was the main planet, but was still within a reasonable range of size compared to the other main planets, Kashyyyk and Dathomir, and to a lesser extent Bogano. Kobo is not like that at all. Kobo is like they were only going to make one planet at first and then decided that was a bad idea later on. Kobo is like if the art department had layoffs and the level design team had to combine everything into one planet to compensate. By the way, that's a joke. I don't think that's the case. The art and the art direction is consistently excellent. The other smaller planets are introduced at a reasonable enough pace to break up the monotony of going back to Kobo over and over and over again, but the question is that good enough? I don't actually think so. This is a Star Wars game, and a major part of what makes Star Wars is different and distinct environments. George Lucas put a great deal of effort into putting at least 3 different environments in each movie and then making the environments as different as possible from movie to movie.
I'm very conscious of the environments, and I try to have at least 3 environments in a movie, and I try to have them as different as possible, and then from movie to movie I try to have the environments as different as possible. You know, in the first movie we were on a sand thing, it was all kind of a brown color. And so then on the second one I put in the snow and it was all kind of white. And then I did the green, you know, swampy kind of thing. And the third one, you know, you're sort of, I mean, what can you do in terms of environments? You have to shoot it somewhere on this earth. Unfortunately, we can't go somewhere else.
This juxtaposition of different environments, colors, and background art is as much a part of Star Wars as lightsabers, Wookiees, and needlessly hypersexualizing female characters. That's one of the many reasons that Fallen Order felt so quintessentially Star Wars. Bracca, Kashyyyk, Zepho, Dathomir, Bogano, Ilum, and Nur are all distinct and different enough that visiting all of them throughout Fallen Order gave you the feeling that you were engaged in a wide-ranging Star Wars adventure. Survivor doesn't really give that same feeling, even if the final planet count is similar, because for the most part you're on Kobo, with brief trips to other places, and while the different areas of Kobo are all visually distinct from each other, they're also still unambiguously Kobo. In the end, I think Survivor's investment into one planet as the primary playground was an interesting experiment that shouldn't be repeated by subsequent Star Wars Jedi games or other similar games set in the universe. Survivor's levels do adequately reward exploration though, with plenty of upgrades to player power and random skill points scattered around the map, as well as a number of perks that make up the new perk system that modify combat in sometimes meaningful, sometimes incredibly powerful, and sometimes pretty boring ways. Because you spend most of your time on Kobo, you'll spend most of your time fighting Kobo's enemies, as the enemy variety rules from Jedi Fallen Order are largely carried forward here, where certain planets have native fauna that function as enemies for Cal specific to that planet that help to fill in the encounter gaps, while Imperial enemies and enemies from the new Bedlam Raider faction form the basis for most of the encounters that you'll be engaging with. Basically every Imperial enemy from Fallen Order sees a return here, and there are some new additions that twist the existing paradigm and create interesting intricacies in encounter design, like adding riot shields to the scout troopers, and there are some other new additions that are mini-boss tier enemies that effectively put some fear in you when you encounter them, like the new DT sentry droids. The Bedlam Raider faction is a little barebones with only 2 main humanoid enemy types, and the rest being former separatist droids, but they mostly accomplish their purpose of providing a secondary lore faction and keeping some variety in the encounters. Scattered between the enemy encounters are a much larger number of bosses than what was seen in Fallen Order, but unfortunately this selection of bosses, with limited exceptions, largely suffers from the same problem that the Fallen Order bosses did. A general lack of originality, a lot of reskins of enemies that you fight elsewhere, and an absolute ton of reused enemies from Fallen Order that are further reused about a dozen times in this game. There are a few standout bosses, and 1 or 2 are absolutely stellar, but largely these are unfortunately pretty forgettable. Keep an eye out for a boss ranking video where we'll be ranking and discussing the bosses from Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order, which should be coming out on the channel soon. Fallen Order's combat, in instances where it was criticized, was singled out for lacking significant depth, variety, and for some questionable hitboxes. More personally, I criticize these things, as well as its implementation of posture and death blows largely feeling unrewarding compared to other games like Sekiro, which implemented these systems much better. So let's just face this fact. The hitboxes are still extremely questionable. Combat variety has undoubtedly been improved, as the 2 stances Cal had access to in Fallen Order has been increased to 5, with the double-bladed lightsaber stance being basically completely remade from scratch. This gives even players familiar with the first game quite a few tools to explore and get used to. None of these stances have the depth that I would expect from an action juggernaut like God of War, for instance, but they're largely serviceable even if most of them are fairly barebones. I get the impression that the combat design team chose to differentiate the 5 forms not just in attack timing or damage, but also in what sorts of moves are available in the combo. For example, only one of them has a delay combo. Almost none of their abilities modify combat meaningfully, even when a skill exists that enables movement, because most of the skills in these skill trees are transformative abilities that cost a resource, rather than being skill-based inputs that functionally change or modify your combo in some way. This is a trend that continues from the first game, that this combat design team seems to be relying very heavily on limited-use resource-consuming abilities to modify combat, rather than skillful use combat variations as you might find in other games. The result is 5 stances that look and feel quite different from each other, but none of which feel quite as good as they should, with the single exception, in my opinion, of the blaster stance. The blaster stance doesn't have much in the way of skills that functionally change the way it plays. Only one ability on the tree costs force, and none of them change the basic combo at all. But the choice between blaster and lightsaber attacks at any given moment lets you weave blaster shots into your basic combo, and gives you more freedom that the other stances don't. It also gives you the opportunity to conduct a Bloodborne-esque gunshot parry, which makes you feel really good at the game when you can pull it off, and carries the accompanying risk of taking potentially lethal damage if you get the timing wrong. As with the bosses, keep an eye out for a video ranking the 5 stances and going into further detail on each one. My greatest criticism of Fallen Order's combat is sadly carried forward into Survivor, however, and the design team seem to have doubled down on the choice of giving enemies a magically refilling posture bar. Apparently, lightsabers canonically reinvigorate anything they touch, which is the only way that I can explain why I could daze an enemy, hit them with my lightsaber, and have them walk away better able to defend themselves afterward. What I mean when I say this system seems to have been doubled down on is that frequently, it seems like enemies have a much smaller window to take damage after a posture break, and the combat strategy of dodging combos and punishing the subsequent openings, which worked extremely well in Fallen Order, has been thoroughly nerfed by just taking away the openings. It's as if the devs saw me fighting Second Sister in Fallen Order like this, and went, wait, that's illegal. They've even taken dodge rolling away and replaced it with a Sekiro-like dash evade. This is maybe the most noticeable and bad change out of all of them, and it's nonsensical. It makes it easier to jump over a lot of unblockable attacks that have no area of effect or logical reason to jump for damage avoidance. The only reason that you do this is because the attacks track the dash better than they can track vertically. In trying to understand the good reasons for making these combat changes, what seems likely is that they wanted to push players further into playing the parry-riposte game that they tried to establish in Fallen Order, but actively discouraged with the lack of a true deathblow system. In doubling down on that lack of a deathblow system and simultaneously pushing players further into the parry game, they've made their combat much more tedious and less rewarding. It seems like they've tried to make their game play more like Sekiro while keeping the Fallen Order systems, and what they've wound up with is combat that is worse than Fallen Order and Sekiro. Another noticeable change from Fallen Order to Survivor is the new limitation on canceling animations in combat. One of the things that made Fallen Order's combat feel very responsive, if a little clunky and animation-led, was the ability to cancel animations into a block with no penalty. This still kind of exists in Survivor, but only if you're using the dual-wield stance. This causes the combat as a whole to feel sluggish and unresponsive. Even the dual-wield stance, which does largely allow animation cancels, doesn't allow it during things like its delay combo, an attack which lasts well over a second. On top of that, every input in the dual-wield stance results in multiple weapon swings. This is maybe the worst possible way this could have been implemented. It creates so significant a disconnect between player input and on-screen action that it would have been insane to not allow animation cancels in most cases. But just being able to stop an attack doesn't make that attack feel good. The intention with the elimination of animation cancels was to force players to commit to their decisions, and it certainly does that, but it also results in scenarios where you can't leave a block animation fast enough to dodge an unblockable attack, leading to frequent bullshit deaths to bosses and enemies that weave unblockable attacks into their combos or follow up with unblockables too quickly. One boss in particular, which I won't show to avoid spoilers, has an unblockable attack that cannot be dodged if you fail to parry the attack that precedes it, which stands in stark contrast to what I think the devs were trying to do in encouraging players to parry, because if you dodge the first attack, you can dodge the second attack. I haven't talked about the story at all because the story of this game is difficult to talk about and give a proper opinion of without spoiling anything. What I can say without spoiling anything is that much like Fallen Order, I don't think that the plot of Survivor is very good. I think it relies on a lot of MacGuffins and contrivances, but I think it makes up for it with the character work that gets done with Cal and Bode Kuna, the new character played by Nosher Dalal. I think if you love Cal, or if you learn to love Bode, that investment will be what carries you through some mostly mediocre plot. If your primary connection is to any other character from the first game, really anyone other than Cal or Bode, I suspect you'll probably find moments that you really like, but outside those moments you won't really be enraptured with what this game has to offer you in terms of narrative and character work. But on the plus side, if that's the case, cutscenes are skippable, which also helps replay value, so there's nothing really forcing you to experience that part of the game if you're not enjoying it. So this review has probably seemed very critical of a game that some people are calling the best Star Wars game since Knights of the Old Republic. And you're right, it certainly is. I'm definitely more inclined to be extremely critical of Survivor because of how engaged I was with Fallen Order, and my complaints are also probably autistically specific. I realize that. I do think that this is a good video game, and I can very clearly see where it's made improvements on its predecessor in some systems. But I think the places where it's worse than its predecessor are so much worse that it drags down my overall sentiment. This is an overall competent video game that I don't personally love. Obviously, my opinion is in the minority, and that's fine. Not every game is going to be for everybody, and there are plenty of objectively good video games that I'm sure you don't personally love. This sadly is the case for me with Jedi Survivor. But my experience has also been significantly worsened by the poor technical state of the game at launch, and I'm very jealous of people who will get to experience this for the first time when the game is actually playable. If there's any advice I could give you, it would be this. Please, do not buy this fucking game in 2023. All throughout my playthrough, I had people coming into my Twitch chat asking if the new patch helped. And for the next 6 months or so, the answer is just going to be no. There is no quick fix or month-long sequence of patches that are going to fix this game's technical problems. This is going to be a very long process of incremental improvements over time, and if the game ever is in an acceptable state, it won't be for at least another 6 months, judging by how it is right now. Check back in October or November, around holiday 2023. See if the game's in a good enough state to justify the $70 price tag. If the technical experience is actually fixed, the game is well worth that price. It's a good game, objectively, just not one that I can see myself sinking the time into that I sank into Fallen Order, and its design decisions really prevent me from enjoying it as much or more than the technical problems. And because of those issues, as of May 2023, it's absolutely not deserving of your money, and I don't recommend that you pay it. Thanks very much for watching. Please like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, and let me know how you enjoyed the game in the comments below. And if you want to know how Jedi Fallen Order speedruns got even more busted right before Survivor's release, click the video on the right side of the screen now. Goodbye, my friends, and may the Force be with you.